Good morning, everyone. We're going to begin. So thank you again for joining this sensitization session in preparation for the Jamaica Urban Solutions for the Environment project call for proposals. I am Joni Jackson, project manager for the project. And with me, I have members of my team who will be doing the presentations today. So we're just going to get right in it. So I'm just gonna share my screen again so you can have a look at the agenda, and then we'll get into it. All right, so today's session, we will just have a very brief introduction to the project and the upcoming call, and then we will follow this with 5 presentations. I will introduce the team members as they are about to present, and then we'll have Q&A. What I will encourage you to do, though, is to place your questions in the chat. So we will answer as many questions in the chat as we can, just in case you have to leave before the open Q&A session. And then we will close the meeting. So very briefly, what is the JU's project? So the Jamaica Urban Solutions for the Environment project is a project being implemented by the Environmental Foundation of Jamaica with funding support from Global Affairs Canada. It has 3 components, and the first one is a sustainable financing mechanism. So basically what we're trying to do is develop a mechanism for the EFJ and to also raise funds before the project ends to be able to continue to support nature-based solutions projects. So I missed out something very important at the beginning. The focus of the project is nature-based climate solutions. In terms of the policy advocacy component of the project, we are working on trying to see how we can, influence the policymakers to place greater emphasis on nature-based solutions and incorporating those in policy. And by policy, we are using that term broadly, so strategies, plans, everything. And this component also includes our public education and awareness activities and capacity building activities. And then we have implementation of nature-based climate solutions in urban areas. And our focus is on vulnerable and marginalized communities. And we want to do this in a gender responsive and socially inclusive way. And this is where this call for proposals comes in, because this is the mechanism by which we are implementing. It is by providing grants to different institutions and groups to actually implement nature-based climate solutions on the ground. So I just have a slide here with our expected results. I'm not going to go too much into that because we do have a lot of discussions to come, and I don't want to take up too much of the time with this introductory aspect. You can ask any questions in the Q&A or in the chat. So who can apply for the grants? The private sector, national and local government entities, some ministries, departments, agencies, urban planners, community-based organizations, civil society, non-governmental organizations, and consortia that includes any of the above named entities. We have identified as a possible issue, some entities may not be able to receive funds or receive funds readily, and so we do encourage partnerships as long as you clearly outline who is responsible for what. As much as we would like to implement the project island-wide, we are not able to do so, and we have some specific parishes that we expect that the projects will be implemented in. And these are Kingston and St. Andrew, St. Catherine, Clarendon, Westmoreland, Hanover, St. Mary, and St. Thomas. Now, your entity does not have to be situated in these parishes, but the projects have to be implemented in these parishes, and the focus is on urban areas only. So we have 4 themes. So urban flood management, heat island mitigation, ecosystem/ecological restoration, and sustainable urban drainage. We will be issuing the call for proposals on March 29th, which is this weekend, and we will have a series of capacity building workshops, which will be held in April. These will be mandatory for persons who intend to make applications, and we will be providing through these workshop support in putting your proposals together, completing the application form, and just assisting in areas where support is needed. The grants will close on May 22, and we expect to notify successful applicants between August and September 2026. The maximum amount for the grant is 15 million Jamaican dollars. So you can bear that in mind. We are expecting proposals to indicate co-financing, even if this is just in kind. So that's my brief presentation, and we are now going to move to our nature-based climate solution specialist, Mrs. Rashini Clark-Randall, and she will basically be doing a little deep dive into what nature-based climate solutions are, and you can pose your questions in the chat as we go along, as I said before. Over to you, Rashini.
Sometimes nature can help, though probably not with my home.
Apologies. Are you able to hear me now, everyone?
Yeah, I can hear you. And I was hearing the video.
As well?
Yeah, I'm not sure if you asked about the video, but yes, we were hearing the video.
Okay. All right. Are you able to see me? All right. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for your patience while I set up the presentation. So this morning, I will be making an attempt to define nature-based climate solutions within the urban context and within the context of the JU's project. So I am Rashini Clark-Randall, Nature-Based Climate Solutions Specialist on the project. And to start the presentation, we first want to explore in our minds what are nature-based climate solutions. Throughout the presentation, you might hear me refer to this as NBCS for short. So nature-based climate solutions, NBCS, same thing. But the textbook academic definition of nature-based climate solutions are deliberate actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore ecosystems while simultaneously addressing urgent societal challenges like climate change or food security. In the context of the JU's project, much of our focus is on climate change, but food security tends to be one of those spin-off thematic areas from the design and implementation of nature-based climate solutions within our cities. So the JU's project has a dual benefit mandate in that we see the benefits that are to be gained at a societal level equal and equivalent to the benefits that are to be gained to the environment or experienced thereof. And so the core pillars of design, in the case of nature-based climate solutions, is that there needs to be a clear understanding of the societal challenge. So what is the challenge that is being addressed? And so that's the starting point of the conceptual design of our project, in that the societal challenge being experienced has to be inherent in the design being implemented to solve it. So the project must solve a specific human problem, such as localized flooding or the urban heat island effect. Another core pillar of design is ecosystem health. So the solution must actively support or restore biodiversity rather than just using nature as a passive tool. And for adaptive management, which is also a core pillar of design, a design should be resilient enough to grow, self-repair, and change alongside the evolving urban environment. So the thing about nature is that nature is resilient. Nature learns from its experiences, and those are quite the characteristics of nature-based solutions or natural elements that we want to harness in our design so that we're able to reap the benefits. So before I get into a quick video to just sum it all up in simple terms, we call them nature-based
Life
solutions.
is full of challenges, but sometimes nature can help.
We call them nature-based climate solutions simply because they utilize natural elements, rocks, stones, vegetation in the design. And so I will lead into the video. If you're not hearing, please stop me, but
Life
we should
is
be able
full
to
of
hear.
challenges, but sometimes nature can help, though probably not with my homework. Nature-based solutions are activities that take care of or restore natural areas and help solve challenges in our communities, like protecting people in cities when there's extreme weather, providing food and clean water, and even helping fight climate change. Flooding from extreme weather can be reduced or even avoided by taking care of and restoring nearby wetlands. Healthy wetlands act like a sponge, allowing them to hold enormous amounts of water. So when lots of water comes, wetlands can absorb a ton of it, helping reduce flooding and keeping people safe. Nature can also help provide good food and clean water. Bringing back natural areas helps increase the number of bees and other pollinators. Pollinators are very important for growing fruits and vegetables, so more pollinators can mean more food. And when natural areas like these are next to rivers and lakes, they help prevent dirt, oil, and other pollutants from being washed into these bodies of water when it rains. This keeps rivers, lakes, and the drinking water they can provide much cleaner. Nature-based solutions also help fight climate change. In fact, some nature-based solutions are designed to do just that. These are called nature-based climate solutions. Nature-based climate solutions restore or protect natural areas, which can capture and store large amounts of carbon from the atmosphere. When natural grasslands are restored, their roots store large amounts of carbon in the ground. And when forests are protected from development, the carbon they stored in their trunks and branches stay there instead of being released. These are just a few of the many ways nature-based solutions are already helping. We depend on nature, and if we take care of it, it will help take care of us. So when you and I support nature-based solutions in our communities and around the world, we are using the power of nature to help keep people fed and safe, protect nature, and fight climate change.
All right, so quite an earful, but that pretty much summarizes the introductory slide. Any questions that you have, you can hold on to the Q&A. I will proceed with the presentation. So to bring this nature-based climate solutions concept out of the abstract and into something we can kind of see, visualize, maybe some of these features we've seen them before and not noticed. But some of the examples of nature-based climate solutions are, for example, a rain garden. I will hover over the feature so that it's clear. A rain garden provides the benefit of slowing down infiltration into the soil, as well as it acts similar to a retention pond in which the water is held for a time until it's evaporated, and hence not just gushing onto a roadway, which is what we tend to see when we have flash flood events or extreme weather conditions. We see water just gushing along our hard infrastructure or roadways. And then that tends to cause quite a bit of damage. There is a bioswale beneath the rain garden. They are very similar features in that they do have a bit of a hybrid element to them, where sometimes they utilize engineering features. The bioswale specifically is able to channel water into a formal drainage system. So it is very good at acting as a complementary feature. If not on its own, it acts as a complementary feature to help to reduce stormwater runoff within our streets. To the extreme right, there's an example of a pocket park. And a park is not something that is new to us. But a pocket park is different from a regular park in that it takes up less than a quarter acre of space. So it is especially appropriate in dense urban environments where there is the complete lack of green space or very limited green space and the potential to develop green spaces. And pocket parks tend to come with more or less of a thematic element to them. So they tend to be spaces where a bit of culture is expressed. And that is also something that is to be brought out from nature-based climate solutions, in that there's a social and human well-being aspect that is a co-benefit experienced from the implementation of a nature-based climate solution. Apologies. So to the next slide, there are some more examples of nature-based climate solutions. And these are examples of features that tend to be a part of our buildingscape. So the green wall or facade is one of those features that is theoretically, this is not something that we have a lot of in Jamaica, but it's something we can test. So they're meant to reduce heat levels within the building. So they provide a cooling effect internal to the structure. And by having more green in the city, naturally, it's meant to draw down our heat levels and reduce that urban heat island effect. A green roof is similar in that it's also meant to reduce heat stress. And then a green roof tends to be one of those spaces that has the potential for other nature-based solutions to be compounded on top of a green roof. We could have rooftop gardens, vertical gardens as well could be a part of the green roof structure. The urban context and why now. So urban areas, as we know, are facing unique pressures. There is population density is increasing, development is going up, especially that high concrete density, great infrastructure. And as many of us in this session would know, these features tend to trap heat and reduce permeability in our city. And as such, they reduce the environment's natural ability to drain itself. So the role of green infrastructure is where we want to introduce nature-based climate solutions, or the concept of it, where a nature-based climate solution can complement or completely replace, depending on the scale and design of it, a traditional concrete gray system. So for example, where we have coastal cities, instead of thinking a seawall, which is an example of great infrastructure, we can think about We can think about reforesting our mangroves for that natural protection instead of using a seawall. And to bring back the point in the beginning of the presentation, before we get into, okay, what nature-based solution is appropriate, we first need to understand the local issue. And so what the JU's project requires is that some sort of stakeholder engagement, especially stakeholder engagement that particularly looks at the perspective of low-income and marginalized communities. We require that as a part of the process of applying for a grant. So a proposal cannot be effective without a diagnostic approach. You must clearly define whether your community is struggling with erosion, for example. Is it stagnant water? Is it air quality? Is it heat stress? And then from that understanding of the local issue, then we move into what type of nature-based solution, nature-based climate solution would be appropriate, and how then can we design it to fit the context of the issue being experienced. All right, so a bit about what we've been doing in the background here on the JU's project. So we have completed a rapid landscape assessment, which was conducted across 7 parishes: Kingston and St. Andrew, St. Catherine, St. Thomas, St. Mary, Clarendon, Hanover, and Westmoreland. And what we were able to do is to identify some of those urban ecosystems and where they're most degraded, and where in those situations where human vulnerability was found to be highest. So, for example, Melissa is an excellent example. It's recent and the press covered it all. We saw a lot of vulnerable communities and the impacts that were experienced from that hazard event. And that's exactly what we want to think. So in terms of a community that is located in a physically vulnerable location, so for example, a community or a settlement that's located along a riverbank, which is a lot of what we saw when we identified where the ecosystems were most vulnerable. And when we spoke to some of those community members that experienced frequent flooding or were just ridden with high heat levels, sometimes they were in physically vulnerable location. Hold that thought, we'll further explore in the next slide. And so what we found in the rapid landscape assessment is that while biodiversity loss and water scarcity are critical thematic areas, flooding and heat stress emerged as the most dominant and immediate threats to urban stability and public health in the targeted areas. So we went across 2 urban communities in each parish in order to get a snapshot of what's going on in the urban landscape. And so that informed then our 4 thematic areas, being flooding, water management, biodiversity loss, and heat stress. So they were not chosen at random, but represent the intersection where natural restoration can provide the highest return on investment for community resilience. So to continue on the RLA evidence base, as I mentioned, there are some conditions that would make a nature-based climate solution unsuitable. So where there is physical vulnerability, for example, a community located within a floodplain, a community located along a riverbank that tends to be frequently flooded every time it rains or every time the river comes up, those would require either an engineered solution alongside a nature-based solution, like, for example, reinforcing the riverbanks with mangroves, or managed relocation to ensure safety. So very often, that's not necessarily the context of which we see nature-based climate solutions to be appropriate. There is high suitability. However, if there's a coastal urban town with ecological sensitivity, and we're looking to make an intervention like putting in a riparian buffer. But if there are people living within this area where we would put in the buffer, then it gets a little bit complicated, and that's where the constraint comes in that that is not really a project we could explore, that nature-based climate solutions would make a difference. And so in terms of scale and the financial reality, large-scale intervention like something that would require an extensive riparian restoration often require investment that exceed our 15 million Jamaican dollars grant limit. And so we would love for the projects, the proposals that come in to be scoped accordingly to what our grant limit is dictating. So for projects of a larger scope, those projects should be looked at as not standalone, but should be a part of larger development plans and frameworks and supported by substantial co-financing and partnerships at the municipal or national level. So that is not to say that if it is that you've identified a project area wherein the work is this extensive that we're saying do not apply, it's just that co-financing and partnerships would be critical in getting the funds for a project of that scope. All right, so a bit of mapping and alignment of just how you can think about choosing an appropriate nature-based solution. So if the challenge is urban heat island effect and lack of green space, we could think about an intervention like a network of pocket parks. And the impact would be that small, underutilized, sometimes degraded urban lots can be transformed into cool islands, quote unquote, that reduce local surface temperatures and provide immediate recreational relief for high density neighborhoods. If the challenge is flash flooding on high traffic corridors, we could think about roadside bioswales and permeable pavements, similar to what was displayed on the example slide, where these are connected to our existing gray infrastructure type drainage. And the impact of this could, for example, be that engineered vegetated channels capture and slow down stormwater runoff from even interacting with the asphalt, depending on its capacity, and hence prevent street flooding while filtering oils and heavy metals from the water, especially our groundwater resources, which tend to get polluted from that raw stormwater runoff when we have flooding events. And if the challenge is, for example, coastal storm surge and erosion, we could think mangrove restoration and living shorelines, which would be natural barriers that absorb wave energy and stabilize sediment while protecting our coastal infrastructure. Again, if the challenge is biodiversity loss and habitat fragmentation, we could look at implementing urban biodiversity corridors in which we're creating some green ribbons, green strips that connect isolated patches of nature that allow local fauna to move through the city while still providing soft infrastructure for air purification. So in that you're not getting one benefit from implementing a nature-based climate solution, you probably would get many all at once. Another applied scenario to help to shape the thinking, thought processes let's just think that we have a problem where there's a high density community in Kingston that faces repetitive flooding. We could look into implementing a linear bioswale network along the edge of a gully to reinforce it. And how this would work in a quick 3-step, there's more to it than that, but in 3 quick steps, the bioswale would capture the surface runoff from the road before it reaches the gully. Step 2, the native deep-rooted vegetation slows down the water and filters out trash and oils. Step 3, excess water is stored in underground gravel or soakaways, hence recharging the groundwater resources. And so the result on a societal level would be that reduced flood damage to homes and other infrastructure and property, and improved public health by removing that stagnant water that tends to be there after a flood event. The environmental benefit to go alongside that is the restoration of local plant biodiversity and cleaner water entering the marine environment. And so we want to set some boundaries, so to speak. What would we fund versus what we wouldn't fund? What we don't fund are gray infrastructure solutions that are in isolation. So standalone civil works like the construction of a new building or a community center is outside our scope. What we do fund is ecosystem retrofitting, for example. So if we're integrating nature into the existing building environment, for example, we're not building a new town hall or community center, but we're retrofitting it with a green wall or a green roof to reduce indoor temperatures, that is something we could fund. We also fund functional natural infrastructure. So if you're building a bioswale or a rain garden, that's what we would fund. Even though it involves construction processes like excavation, layering, it still is a part of developing that natural infrastructure in the form of a nature-based climate solution, and so that is something we could fund. If there's a hybrid solution wherein the gray infrastructure element is critical to the function and survival of the main nature-based solution, that is something that you could also apply for funding for. And so the takeaway meant to begin from this presentation is that as a project, the JUs, we fund nature-based climate solutions that work for people as well as the environment. And we want to encourage the shift from viewing nature as something to manage to viewing nature as a partner in urban resilience. And so that takes me to the end of my presentation. Thank you for your time and attention. Over to you, Joni.
All right, thanks, Rashini. So we're going to move to our next presenter. I just want to remind presenters of the time that was allocated to your presentation. And Rashini, there are some questions in the chat if you could have a look at those and respond. So we're moving on to our second presentation, which is from our Gender and Social Inclusion Specialist, Carol Narcisse. So she will be taking us through some of the considerations related to gender and social inclusion for your projects. So Carol.
Thank you very much, Joni, and good morning, everyone. Joni, do I have sharing privileges?
Yes, you do.
Thank you. Okay, and so good morning again. I want to build on what Mrs. Clark Randall has shared and focus our attention now on the issue of enabling our projects to have a beneficial impact and equitable involvement of the people in the circumstance, the people in the context of the project. And so we're going to be talking very quickly about and just reminding ourselves that different people exist in the community where the project is taking place, and that those different people experience the issue or concern or problem in different ways because they, as in their particular identities and characteristics, come with different experiences, with different needs, different knowledge, etc. And so we want to look at how issues of gender and social inclusion in making sure we're involving as broad a range of the people who are in our community space, looking at how these are key considerations in designing urban nature-based solutions. And so different people, different experiences, different needs. And first I want to just take us to look at what we mean by communities. And just to say that all projects, as you know, take place in communities, but communities are not singularly defined as just residential spaces. Community can be residential or institutional. So projects can take place within a school or at a community center, local meeting place, a hospital, etc., etc. So nature-based solutions can be implemented in residential communities defined by being geographic spaces in which people live, or they can be implemented in institutional community contexts, or a combination of the two types of spaces. So how can projects foster equity in who participates and who contributes, who benefits in whatever quote unquote community context the project is going to be implemented in? And the first point is that social context matters in the projects that we're designing. And they matter as much as the technical considerations that go into designing a sustainable nature-based solution project. So in designing the project, we need to have demographic data disaggregated by gender, age, socioeconomic status, and we need to deepen our understanding of the social context of the problem in that the nature-based solution is going to be addressing, because for every issue or challenge or problem, there is a social context in which it is occurring. People are there, they are experiencing the issue in a different way, depending on who they are and what their characteristics are. They have different knowledge about the issue, and they have different needs. And so in designing the project, it's important to understand that social context. So some of the key questions to ask is, who is impacted by this issue or this problem, and how are they impacted, and why are they impacted in this way? Who is most able to participate and to benefit from the project? Who is missing? Who is underrepresented, and why? How do different groups use the particular resource or are likely to use the resources and amenities that are going to be addressed by the project? So if it's a roadway that's constantly flooded, how do people use that roadway? Who are the users? What are their characteristics? And so a flooded roadway, for example, is going to have a different meaning and impact on different groups of people. The people who traverse that roadway with their children, the people who traverse that roadway who have a disability, the people who traverse that roadway who are seniors, and therefore navigating the space is impacted by their senior status, or their status as a person living with a disability, or their status as a person traversing that roadway with young children. So who is using the space or the resource? So if it's a river or a wetland, who is using that river? Who is using that wetland? For what purposes? How are they impacted by this resource? And so on and so forth. Those kinds of issues are important to bear in mind as we design the intervention. And our specific needs, so this is another question important to ask yourself, are the specific needs of the different demographic groups in that community, whether it's an institutional community or other. What are the specific needs of women, of men, of persons with disabilities, of seniors, of other vulnerable groups? And are those needs known to you? Have you been able to ascertain them in order to determine how best to respond to them in the design of the intervention or the project? So in order to know what strategies are useful that will ensure different groups of people's equitable representation and participation in the different project phases, you have to know something about who they are. And so we're able to do this by means of focus groups, community surveys, town hall meetings, or community public space meetings, where we get to meet the different groups of people in the community. And we have to be intentional about bringing those different groups into those discussions. So very quickly then, many people say, but what does gender have to do with anything? Huh? And so just to define that gender is referring to the socially and culturally determined roles, responsibilities, choices, and expectations that we have in societies about males, females, and what constitutes masculinity and femininity. And because these are socially and culturally determined norms, they change over time. And they're different from region to region. And why these issues, these norms about what roles people have, what responsibilities they have, what choices they have, and what the societal expectations of them are, why this matters is that this then contributes to the differences in people's life experiences and life choices and people's decisions and their behaviors. And that's very important to understand as we are defining projects. So gender and other demographic identities, disability, age, geographic location, etc., these impact different life circumstances, as I've said. So people are occupying different positions in the community that they exist in. They have different levels of readiness for participation in opportunities. They utilize the resources around them in different ways. And also these identities impact people's access and their relationship to assets. So males and females have very different access to land ownership or to land tenure and to land usage. They have very different relationships and access to finance, to information, to social space and how they occupy social space. And they have different uses for natural assets, how women and men use water, for example, can differ very significantly, with women relying on water resources for their caregiving and social reproduction roles, more so than males who are utilizing water assets more for income generation, etc. And so these issues matter, and understanding these issues is important as we set about designing projects. And different groups of people have different access to power and to voice and representation in decision making, etc. And so again, that's important. So when we talk about social inclusion and demonstrating social inclusion in the projects that we design, we're talking about identifying who is disadvantaged, how are they disadvantaged, who is included or most likely to be included, and who is likely to be excluded, and therefore being able to take positive, thought out action that reduce barriers for people to participate and to benefit, and to promote equity. Equity in who is going to be heard, whose needs are taken account of, who is likely to be empowered by this intervention. How do we design the intervention in a way that enables as broad a cross-section to participate and to benefit? So very quickly, some red flags in designing the projects: unsubstantiated thinking, such as this project benefits or will benefit everyone equally. If we make those kinds of assumptions or assertions, then the project has to be designed intentionally in a way that's going to impact everyone in their different demographic identities equally. And therefore, we have to know what will prevent seniors from benefiting equally. What would prevent women with dependents, with people who seniors who they care for, young children who they care for? What would we have to do to make them able to participate in the project meeting, and so on? So ensuring that we can substantiate this benefit across different demographic groups is going to be important. Barrier blind thinking is also something to watch out for. When we say, for example, we don't prevent anyone from participating, and many people say that, our project, we don't prevent anyone from participating. That usually is a signal that we have not, we haven't done the investigation and fact-finding to understand the different groups, what their different needs are, what their different experiences are, and therefore we haven't enabled ourselves to have enough information to understand what barriers they may face, barriers to being able to participate, barriers to benefiting in an equitable way. So as a quick example, in the post-Melissa period, we did various kinds of relief, and we might have made the relief resources available in a very urban setting, forgetting that there would be barriers for people who live outside of the urban setting to reach. Or we may have distributed water as one of the relief activities, and we distribute the same amount of water to everyone, not understanding that actually some people need more water because at their household typically has more dependence in that household. So understanding who is there and what their needs are then informs how we go about intervening. Wishful thinking is also something to be avoided and something to be aware of. When there is no specific plan or strategies that respond to different groups' needs and can foster inclusive participation, then asserting that our project is going to benefit everyone equally is essentially wishful thinking, because we don't have anything programmed into the project design that would enable people to overcome the barriers to their participation. So as a quick example, people may need childcare support in order to be able to participate equally in the meetings. The time of day that we schedule meetings can make the difference between who can come and who can't, etc. Evidence and data poverty is something that impacts a lot of projects, that we start off designing projects with inadequate or no information to guide the project planning and designing. And so we need to make sure that we have enough social data in order to factor that into the project planning and the project designing, as well as factor that into what we track, how we track it, how we measure, so that we can prove that the project, or we can know even that the project is having equitable social outcomes. And so the takeaway from this quick presentation is that gender equality, equity, and social inclusion actually go a far way to strengthen the Sustainable Development Goals and development outcomes broadly. And that projects that include gender responsive and inclusive actions that are thought out, intentional, they're not ad hoc, they're not accidental, that those kinds of well thought out elements to our project lead to greater equity and greater impact, and ultimately give us measurable social benefits from the interventions. And so those are some of the considerations that we are urging you to have in mind. Over to you, Joni.
All right, thank you, Carol, for that excellent presentation. We are making a slight shift in our agenda, and I'm going to invite a member of our finance team, Ms. T. Valerie Uno, to do the presentation on sustainability, maintenance, and finance. And please keep the questions coming in the chat. Telly, over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen. Give me one moment. Okay. Okay, all right. So good morning, everyone. So my name is Valerie Onu. I am a member of the team focused on developing this sustainable financing mechanism for EFJ and supporting the JUS project. Our team leader, Mrs. Audrey Richards, is based in Jamaica. She is also the capital markets lead and leads on the special sustainable financing mechanism. We also have Nicole Peter Patterson, who is our inclusive finance lead. She's also the Caribbean ambassador for 2X Global, which sets standards for gender lens investing. So without further ado, I'll get into it. So one second, I am right. So when we talk about sustainability, sustainability needs to be designed, but the key question is, how do we get to designing it? So our core approach to nature-based climate solutions is really about designing for systems, not just for individual locations, sites, or projects. So we're kind of moving away from, financing projects to the idea, isolated projects to the idea of financing systems. We look at, for example, a particular site and immediately zoom out to understand the broader system with it's a part of. So whether it's water, it's food, it's urban networks, as you saw from the first presentation Rashini gave on what nature-based climate solutions is, we are really working in systems and ecosystems. So identifying what is broken or inefficient is going to be one of the key things as part of your project design. And that will lead us to really having some very targeted nature-based climate solution interventions that will now create value pathways, economic pathways, and very clear financing pathways, all leading to what we would define as sustained impact and climate resilience. So we're not about planting trees, we're really about correcting broken systems and flows to create lasting value. So I want this to be anchored in your brain. So when we're thinking about the design, project design, right? I remember I said we're moving away from projects to system and systemic interventions. So let's look at what the old way of thinking, right? So when we think about the site, we think about a project, a development project and, people that need to be done and things. But in the context of an MBCS, we're looking at where is the intervention sitting. And I'll come to an example later. So when we look at systems in a normal project, we're looking at a broader system, an environment. Say we're doing something in downtown Jamaica and we're dealing with at-risk, right? So that's broad. But in our context, we're looking at nature systems, water, food, the coast, since we're coastal along the water, urban networks, etc. And then within those systems, we want to look at how these systems move. One key way of thinking about it is the flow. Everything has a flow, whether it's water, nutrients, heat, people. So when you think about it from that lens, you can see what is broken, what are the problems within that flow. Is it moving too fast? Is it polluted? Is it hot? Is it, blocked? And when you start thinking about it, we can now jump straight to really looking at the solution and looking at what intervention is going to bring about. So in a normal project, you kind of build something, maybe a traditional, what we call gray infrastructure without concrete things to solve the problem. But then when you start thinking about what the intervention is, you need to think about, are you going to slow something down? Are you going to store something? Are we storing carbon? Are we going to restore? How are we connecting to maybe even supply chains as well? Because human intervention is key. Or are we going to be cooling? So those are type of things you would think about your intervention. And then you ask the question, who benefits? Later you'll see the type of, should I say, projects or value pathways we can select, whether it's public only or what we call hybrid or market-based solutions. And then, of course, we look at economic pathways. Are there any cost savings to this intervention? Is there any income being generated? Are we avoiding any losses to our biodiversity? And then, of course, who pays? So the question of who pays is very relevant. Whether or not you're generating revenue or you're not generating revenue, it's very key. Are you getting paid through further grants beyond JU's project? Is it going to be blended, a bit of grants, a bit of private capital coming in, or is it only purely private capital? And then, of course, very important, resilience. How it sustains over time. If there were something were to happen, another hurricane, can it bounce back and recover? Now, when you look in parallel about how we think about traditional projects, we only think about immediate outputs. We ignore the underlying economics. and we don't really think of long-term financing logic. And when the project ends, we stop thinking. So what makes a nature-based climate solution different from a developmental project is not just the activity, it's the system, the flow and the logic. So if you take stock of this logic, you have a very good project at the end of the day. So why this conversation matters deeply is because a lot of people see projects succeed in their initial implementation and then they falter when it comes to sustainability. So, and it's really not because of a flawed idea. We have some great projects out there, or if not because funding was insufficient, it's because we did not take the time to design sustainability. And that is really where the issue is. So this could be a picture you could recognize. So this is a clear example where in Kingston, there's a community garden that's planted. We go to a nice big launch, ribbon cutting, everything, photos taken. The public service, they said this is a success. After 6 months later, the grant ends, what happens? Months later, you're wondering how come, who's watering the plants? They're dying. Who's replacing the tools? Who's buying the next seed for the next cycle? These are all elements that really need to that really address the issue of sustainability, and we need to bridge the gap between this, especially when project is completed, to really sustain impact. So let's explore further. When you look at another example, so this is an example of a watershed restoration project in the hills of Mobe. You have trees planted, you have community being engaged, you have monitoring reports, and then 3 years later, you're seeing everything seems as though the project didn't exist because no one looked at who maintains the access path, who protects seedlings from fires during the dry season, and who coordinates the farmers, whose land border the restoration areas, right? So this heading, project ends when funding ends, is very critical, and we need to shift from development projects to really sustainable systems, which is what a nature-based climate solution system is. We need to focus on activities that when we think about the development mindset, you focus on activities and outputs. You have the timeline. We'll still have a timeline on this project, but the key thing is ensuring that maintenance beyond the project period has been considered and there are actionable plans in place, and ownership is clear beyond the project. So when you look at the historic analysis, EFJ is one of the largest grant providers in Jamaica. And when you see the portfolio, when you look at the portfolio, overwhelmingly, a lot of these projects did not have a financial sustainability beyond the grant period, right? And so this is the gap we want to try and correct, using J-Use as the main project that would now start to allow EFJ to change to transition and change its paradigm, right? And why do we need this? Because without sustainable models, environmental gains are going to be quickly lost. And let's be fair, when it comes to grant funds, it's dwindling. Public funds are dwindling. So we have to find ways of doing things a little bit more efficient. So we can't solve long-term urban resilience problem with short-term project thinking. We have to go beyond long cycles, which is key. So the other thing that one would have said is, okay, you're financing, so obviously you're looking at monetization, how the project can be monetized. But let's face it, not all value is monetizable. but all nature projects, nature-based climate solutions do create value, and that is something you need to take away with. So I have a few more minutes. So really understanding the value creation in nature-based climate solutions. You do have some projects, some urban projects that could be revenue generating. For example, if we think about urban agriculture, at the end of the day, we're looking at food security, and people must eat, and value exchange that can be monetized, right? And then you have cost saving value, for example, if you're growing a mangrove forest, the cost savings for, say, flood waters, storm surge, and so on are big because they actually avoid losses. They can reduce storm surge impact by 65%. And if you're on the coastal area, you're a hotel and so on, that really means you have avoided losses. So that can be calculated. And then, of course, you have some projects that the value is really public. It's a public good. And just as Carol had indicated, as a public good, a lot of persons can benefit from it, youth, women, etc. So then that has public value, like the urban green spaces, the green corridors, those type of projects can facilitate. So fairly quickly, when we think about value, you think first of environmental value, flood mitigation, cooling, because the stress we have, heat, is very big, and every year it gets hotter and hotter. Biodiversity, water quality, and then you also have social value, which already Carol has kind of intimated. So when you think about people's livelihoods, their health, ensuring inclusion of all people, whether it is they're disabled, they're women, that's very important. Economic value. So economic value doesn't only have to be revenue. It could be cost savings, as I said, with the mangrove example, looking at property values, etc. And then, of course, very important, the beneficiaries, the residents, the farmers, the ecosystem. This is now the human ecosystem, government, private sector, civil society. All of these beneficiaries need to be things. So when you're designing your project, you need to think value in those 4 buckets. If you don't define the value, you can't define sustainability. So we need to think, I've already talked about social value and inclusion. You need to design for everyone. Carol already mentioned it. And then, of course, now we come to financing. We need to align it. So I said, even though you're not revenue generating, there's still some financing that can be sought. So, of course, for public good, funding like JUICE is fantastic because it's grants. You don't necessarily have to pay back, but you do have to show value and sustainability, right? Those that are revenue generating, as what Rashini mentioned, she said, we would love to see beyond the 15 million, if there are ways you can also attract additional funding. It could be private capital, it could be philanthropic, when we talk about blended finance and so on. So different value attracts different types of capital. And then, of course, when we start thinking about what EFJ and JUICE investment really means, it's not your traditional, okay, we're going to get a grant, we're doing the project, it ends, we define some sustainability metrics and everybody happy. No, no, no. As I mentioned earlier, EFJ is transitioning. And in its transition, it's really looking at this capital it's received from the government of Canada as catalytic capital with a clear expectation of value creation and, if possible down the road financial return, meaning we're not looking at just grants and grantees. We'd like to now put these projects into a portfolio. So thinking investment now. It's like a portfolio and the assets, which now EFJ can now mobilize additional fund financing to do. So there we are investing in pipeline development to help you grow along the way. So it's not just a one-off. This is the whole idea behind this. And this is a significant opportunity for governments, allocations, private sector, also additional donor funding as well. I think I have 2 minutes left, so fairly quickly, I think I already introduced the concept of design, and we really need to ask who maintains this over time, very critical. And there are another 4 buckets. We can look at community stewardship, we can look at government integration, and I know we have a lot of public sector here, so definitely partnership with government is key. Private operators could also participate, and in this context, you think cooperatives, social enterprises, JAS, even though people will say, well, agriculture is rural, but you do have some urban as well. Hybrid partnership as well is very key. So this is very important because if we cannot define sustainability at this stage, then it will fail in implementation. So very thing to get is getting the commitment in writing. So as you're developing your project, it's also key. If you're working with partners, you need to address certain questions. Who holds the legal title? So if it is a piece of land you're incorporating into it, you make sure you have the docs in there. If you're partnering, make sure there's a formal MOU, especially when it comes to maintenance responsibilities. Very key, because that will add value, right? And of course, creating that contingency plan. So, key success factors for nature-based climate solutions. As I said, try and get some early agreements, especially when it comes to that whole maintenance. If you can embed maintenance costs into your organization, or even partnering with government to deal with that, that's great. And of course, you need to define value. So lastly, here you can see the different types of value. Market-based value. Market value is what you can be commercialized. Public value, grants, public budgets in the community, public sector, and of course, there's a nice segue in between where we can actually try and bring in public financing to help early projects start, and then later on, you bring in private capital to continue it. This is the most ideal. So I'm going to go through these couple pathways and then end it because I think I'm over time by a couple minutes. So the first pathway, I believe you've already seen Rashini's presentation on green infrastructure. So here's just an example, and you can see in this context, the value created is a public good. You can see how government is integrated, and they can formally adopt the structure and even incorporate it in the annual budget. You can even have NGOs, CBOs that can now join and help with the light cleaning and programming. And then when it comes to peri-urban protection, here's another, like a watershed, as I mentioned before. I mentioned cost savings, so you have reduced water treatment costs. My apologies. Got kicked out. Okay. Yes, sorry. Reduce water treatment costs, avoided infrastructure damage. Yes, sorry about that. Revenue stream, and of course, community stewardship. And then lastly, we have a project where you can have vacant lots. And here you can see, you can even incorporate aquaponics, vertical farming, and so on. But that can create revenue, that can create jobs, food security, while addressing the ecological things. And you can even incorporate community stewardship. So very quickly, role of civil society to act as a convener. You're the connective tissue. You need to help breaking down these investment concepts to people in the community. Academia can provide a lot of that baseline, even independent verification, so partnering with them. And then, of course, private sector, you need to move beyond just normal CSR, become co-investors, actually even buy from the supply chain if it's revenue generating, or become an innovative partner. And of course, I don't have it on my slide, but government is very critical. You are providing the enabling ecosystem, the enabling environment. You're providing the ability for certain ministries, you can actually partner to help develop these. And as a key takeaway, we have a business model canvas. So even if you're not generating revenue, this business model canvas kind of captures the value. It helps us see what the value proposition is, who the benefits are going directly to, what is your cost structure, what are the potential revenue streams, or if not, social benefits. So these are some of the things our capacity building will help develop. So as to finalize my presentation, as I said, EFJ is moving from pilot to really developing portfolios. So we're doing pipeline development. We're kind of moving away from these siloed type of independent projects to systems. And a key takeaway, your project is an asset. So we want to recognize green infrastructure, nature-based solutions as assets that are on, public sector balance sheets and can be on balance sheets. These are highly valuable and are risk-reducing assets. In closing, if you had the 15 million Jamaican dollars to invest in one of the pathways in your community tomorrow, which one would you choose and why? Thank you. We're here for questions.
Right.
We're around for questions. I'll just be going offline.
Okay. All right. So thanks for that. So we're gonna move to our next presenter, our Special Projects Officer, Renika Walker at night. She will be doing a presentation on stakeholder engagement and co-design. So Renika, over to you.
Thank you, Joni. Good morning, everyone. So as Joni said, I'll be doing a presentation on stakeholder engagement. Give me 1 second, so I just bring up my slide quickly. Just want a thumbs up if you're seeing my screen. I'm not sure.
Okay, yeah, we're seeing your screen.
You're seeing? Okay, great. Present. Are you seeing the entire screen? Are you still seeing the screen? Not hearing.
We're seeing the screen, but we're seeing your notes. So just go to full screen. Just click full screen. Yeah.
You should be seeing it now. Are you guys seeing it?
Okay now. Yeah.
Okay, sorry for the technical challenges. Morning, everyone. So I'll be presenting on stakeholder engagement and co-design, which is a fundamental aspect of the JU's project. We view stakeholder engagement as critical component where the strongest proposals are not written for communities, but written with them. So the JU's project, as you have heard based on my colleagues' discussion, is about inclusivity as well as effective nature-based solution, which requires early and continuous stakeholder engagement. With that being said, in terms of stakeholder engagement, we define it as just actively involving people who are affected, influenced, or perceived to be influenced or impacted by a project, the project that you are implementing. And with that in mind, we want to encourage inclusiveness with stakeholder engagement to ensure there are inclusive voices that will solve the real problems that individuals are facing, to build ownership, stakeholder trust, buy-in, to reduce the project risk of failure, and to improve the proposal score. With that also, we want to encourage stakeholders to foster a sense of ownership, encouraging authentic representation of diverse perspective, so they can be included in decision making, the planning, the designing of your project, and even the full implementation, to ensure that there is sustainability, as Telly has discussed earlier regarding the sustainability aspect of it. So it's resonate within the community. And with stakeholder engagement, the first aspect is by identifying your stakeholders. And in our context, stakeholders can be community residents, and we want to ensure that they include the vulnerable groups, women, youths, the disabled communities, local governments, NGOs, civil societies, community-based organizations, private sectors, and you can name them. After you've done your stakeholder identification, the next phase is to do the stakeholder analysis. In the analysis, you can use various tools. Two of them, which I have here, for example, is the stakeholder analysis table, as well as the stakeholder analysis grid, where you identify the interest level of your stakeholders, meaning how much they care, the influence, which is how much power they have, and then the strategy that you're going to use to engage them, whether it be by focus group discussion, workshops, community meeting, formal consultations, etc., partnership, sponsorship. We want to ensure that all of those engagement strategies are mapped to the stakeholders based on their interests and expectation. As it relates to stakeholder engagement, we want to also encourage co-designing, where we work with stakeholders to design the solution and not just design solutions for the stakeholders. So they should be involved in the process completely. So co-designing means collaborating with the stakeholders and not informing them about the decision, but involving them in the process. Okay. Within the co-design process, we want to, as I mentioned before, you identify the stakeholders first, and then you use your soft skills to understand the needs of the stakeholders and their expectation by listening to them within their consultation that you're having with them, to actively listen to their needs, ensure that whatever solutions you're creating speaks to the diverse voices that you hear from the stakeholders, the challenges that they're experiencing, to meet their expected needs. The second aspect is to co-create the solution. And when you're co-creating the solution, this is where all brainstorming of ideas comes together. You have the session, the stakeholder create the solutions with you in that element. The next process is to validate with the community. And in this process, we want to ensure there's a feedback loop with stakeholders. So you have to ensure that you discuss with the stakeholders that design that you have created, to see if there's any need for adjustment. Because you might have identified a stakeholder in the onset of the project, but throughout designing of the project, there are new stakeholders that will come on board, that you also have to understand their needs to see how the project will have an effect on them. So in this process, the key principle is that we do not do anything for the stakeholders. We do it with them, not do it on our own. So these are some examples that I have put here regarding the JU's context and what we mean by involving the stakeholder in the co-designing process. First is designing a green space with the community. We have to ensure that their inputs are heard in terms of safety and use of the space. If you're designing a drainage system, NBS intervention such as a bioswale or a rain garden, we want to ensure that the engineering perspective, these are the technical experts, as well as the residents, because they're also experts in the field because they're facing the issues. So they would be better able to tell you what the solutions could be, or at least tell you what the challenges they're experiences are, and how it could be resolved. The third is including women and vulnerable group in the decision-making process in terms of accessing the space and how it would benefit them, as Carol has mentioned before. And the last stage is finalizing the proposal. Through co-designing, we are encouraging that whatever the process is, whether the engagement strategy that you use, it empowers the stakeholders that are involved so that diverse voices can be heard. In terms of the JU's context, what we're expecting for the proposal is evidence. We want to see evidence of stakeholder consultation, and evidence include meeting minutes, attendance logs. We want to see even surveys that you have probably conducted during the sessions. We want to see that evidence in the proposal. We want to also see clear identification of key stakeholders, how stakeholders are influenced through the analysis that I stated before by looking at their impact and their influence. And then we want to see where you plan continued stakeholder engagement, because even though we require that you do stakeholder engagement before proposal is submitted, we also encourage stakeholder engagement as a continuous process throughout the life cycle of the project. And this is a practical example of stakeholder engagement. However, this is not complete, it's incomplete. So for example, this scenario stated that if you are proposing a flood mitigated project using nature-based solution at a school for stormwater management, you would have maybe like 2 bioswale, a rain garden, and an integrated rain system. But if it is that you are just putting down these solutions without properly having discussions with the stakeholder, properly understanding their challenges, maybe you're saying the flooding instance, you came one time at the site to view the space and you see the flooding occurring at one site at the top of the road, for example, or the schoolyard of the compound. But then the stakeholder would be able to tell you that no, the source of the flooding is actually the road. So if you don't address that issue, or if you don't speak to the stakeholders, I should say, to understand where the source of the issue is, you will be addressing something on the compound that will not necessarily meet their needs of the challenges that's happening, which is the flooding on the compound. So first you have to think about the type of questions to ask them. For example, did you speak to the community, the staff, the student? In this case, as Carol had mentioned, communities can include an institution, and it could be a school in this case. So the staff, the students, the parents would fall into the category of what a community is. So did you speak to them? Did you consult engineer, which is a technical expert of what could happen? Because the engineer would be better able to tell you the hydrology, I should say, of the landscape, to tell you how much flood water is within the area, how much flood water can the solution that you are co-designing and planning to implement can hold and reduce off the school premises. So you have to consult the specific engineers to get an idea and involve them in the design process as well. And did you speak to the women, the vulnerable groups that are within the space to share their safety concerns that they may have? Because as Carol has mentioned before, different people experience different things, different hazards differently. I use differently quite often, but that's the case. And then did the community, for example, the board of directors, the executive body, students, teacher, did they agree to support or maintain it? So I won't go any further in terms of the maintenance since Telly had mentioned that prior. So for a strong co-design proposal, we encourage, as I said, you partnering. Partnership is a key aspect. So partnering with local authorities, the community members, and this is a prime example this is a scenario where you're going to develop, for example, a green corridor along National Heroes Circle to Emancipation Park. There are many gaps within that stretch that requires different solution and different needs of people. So you have to consult them, co-design with them to ensure that you capture that. So for stormwater management and cooling, you may need a bioswale for one area, but another area might need mature trees shade trees along the path. You might need a rain garden versus something else. So you have to speak with them at all times. Partnership with key organizations such as yourself, the local government, municipality ministries, they would you guys would have the information of how and what's going on within the urban spaces and how the community in partnership with you could create a design together. So key questions for your proposal that you should ask: who did you engage? What did they say? How did it change the design? And how will you continue to engage? So the key takeaway from this presentation is that engagement should start early. You should be inclusive, ensure that diverse voices are on the table, they're heard, and they are not only heard, but throughout the project life cycle and decision making, they are incorporated. And you should show evidence including meeting notes, attendance lists, photos, surveys, case studies, letters of support. Those are evidence of stakeholder engagement. And then fourth, co-create the solutions with the community members in mind. And then fifth and final is to ensure engagement throughout the process of the project life cycle. And that is my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Monica, for that presentation. So we're going to go to our final presentation. It will be from our monitoring and evaluation specialist, Zara Miller. So Zara, you can go ahead.
Hi, give me a second. I'm trying to get my video up and hide this thing so I can start my presentation. Yes, okay, great. Slideshow from beginning. Okay, morning everyone. As Joni mentioned, I'm Zara Miller and I'm the M&E consultant with the JU's team. And my session is basically going to help you answer the question, how do you prove that your project actually works? And I'm going to cover three things: how to write strong objectives that describe real change, why baseline data is non-negotiable, and basically what the M&E requirements for J use at different stages. So let's jump into it. First, why does M&E matter? M&E matters for three reasons. The first reason is accountability. And yes, there's accountability
Sorry to cut you, Zara, but could you go full screen?
Oh. I don't know what you're seeing.
So we're seeing the slide and your notes on the right with a smaller version of your slide above the notes.
Oh, okay. All right, let me just stop that then. I'm gonna end it and start again. Or maybe if I just turn off my extra screen.
Okay, good now.
No, it's not moving. Okay. Right. So I'm saying the three reasons why M&E matters. First one is accountability. Yes, there's accountability to our donors, but more importantly, our community needs to know that the resources and their time and their interest has created real change, not just activity. The second reason is learning. Your monthly data, your monitoring data tells you whether your project is working while you still have the time to change course. So if you're off track to meet your targets, you want to know this in month 3, not at month 12. And this is known as adaptive management, where you're using evidence to make better decisions throughout the project and enhance your chance of overall success at the end, not just to report on it. And finally, demonstrating impact. Without data, the best case is an anecdotal story. Whereas when you have your data, you have proof of what you did and what actually worked. So a strong objective names a specific problem, describes the change that your project will create, and tells you how you know the change happened. So typically we are trained to think in terms of activities. When we're thinking project, we're thinking activities. We plan our workshops or we plant our trees. But we have to learn to explicitly connect the things we do to the so what. And it's not that we don't have that so what in mind. There's usually a reason why we've chosen the activities that we have, but we have to make it explicit. Funders don't want to invest in activities, they want to invest in change. So we have to call out that change and hold the project accountable to actually making that change. And one way you can test this is to read your objective out loud. Does it sound like something that's on a to-do list, or does it sound like something the community is experiencing or going through? So for an example, this would be considered a weak objective because it's just telling us what we're going to do, install a rain garden in the community. But that doesn't really tell us anything. It doesn't tell us what the rain garden is going to do. It doesn't tell us who is in this community or where is this community and what difference will the rain garden make. So a stronger objective would look like this. So now we're going to reduce flood duration on Main Street by 30% for 200 low-income households by December, let's just say that's 2026. And then the final question is one that makes or breaks your M&E for your project, and that is, how will anyone know whether or not your project worked? So you need to be able to point to something, a number, an observation, a score, something that was notably different at the end compared to at the start of the project, at the beginning. And if you can't describe that now, at the application stage, you're going to struggle to find and collect the right data once you start, which connects directly to the next step, which is the first step in your M&E for your project, which is your baseline data. Your baseline data is your starting point and describes what was it like before you started. This gives a clear demonstration of the problem. So it's very clear to you and your community members who go through it. But for us at EFJ and our funders, we do not have the benefit of that lived experience. And so the baseline really gives us a clear understanding of what it is and how will we know to measure success. So no baseline, no proof. You plant 200 trees, that's great, but if we don't know what was there before, then we can't show that there was an improvement in vegetative cover or temperature, or that it made any difference. And then you collect it at the start before you begin any activity. And it's simple measures that we're looking for. You take photos, you do a quick site survey, ask community members what they think of their environment right now, and the solutions. What is important is that it is systematic and intentional. So you're going to do an observation, you're not just going and saying, oh, the sky is blue and the grass is green. there's an objective to the observation, and there are specific things that you're checking for each time you make that observation. And so it's documented in a systematic way. You can also look at timestamp photos. Renika mentioned a while ago in terms of your meeting minutes. So if you have a certain structure to your meeting and you always do a check-in at the end, and you do a round robin across your participants and you ask the same questions. So it doesn't have to be this large-scale, intense research. And we've heard it mentioned throughout the presentation, but it's worth repeating because it is non-negotiable for J use, and that is the disaggregation by the various groupings, whether gender, whether persons with disabilities, low-income households, women, men, whoever your target or targets are. And you have to disaggregate from day one. So in terms of defining the problem, as well as the engagement, as well as the solution. So every step of the way, this is a requirement for J use. So what indicators can you track? So indicators are simply the things that we use to measure to show that change has happened. And this slide gives you a menu of possibilities organized into 4 categories. This is not meant to be prescriptive. You don't have to feel limited to what is on the screen, but it's just to give you an idea of things that you can do. Tip when you're thinking about your indicators, you want to think of realistic. Realistic beats ambitious every time. So if you have 3 to 5 indicators that you consistently track and measure, will be better than 10 indicators that you can't measure and sit blank on every report. So the essential test for any indicator you choose is it realistic? Can I measure it now? How easy is it to repeat this measurement, and can I measure it again at the end? So M&E is not something that you do at the end, contrary to popular belief. It runs throughout your project cycle, from the design phase right through to close out. Waiting till the end doesn't work. I'm sure could get a lot of testimonies from this room, myself included, even as an M&E practitioner. So the reason why it doesn't work is by the time you reach the closeout, the data that you need has evaporated, and you're struggling to show the value that your work that you did. Or you reach the end, you have the data, and then you realize that nothing has changed, but because you weren't looking at it and reviewing it all along, then you're only just realizing this now. So at the project start, you're going to finalize your indicators and collect your baseline before implementation begins. So this is now while you're designing your project idea. Once you've gotten a grant and then you're now in the implementation phase, you're going to set up your registers, you're going to set up whatever data collection tools you may need every quarter. You're going to submit a report, a progress report, but you're tracking engagement as it's happening. You're tracking your feedback as you're getting it. Just a reminder to be systematic about collection, whether the community testimonials, for example. And then at midpoint, you're going to have various check-ins. So you're going to have a site visit by the EFJ and or the JU's team. And this visit is not an audit or an inspection. It is a coaching visit. It's a supportive visit. And it's to help you to just check in before we reach a point of reporting to see how things are going, what could be strengthened, and give you ideas. There will also be a midterm evaluation that's will be done by an external evaluator, but just mentioning it because you will likely be included as one of the data points. And you're comparing to your baseline and adjusting if needed. Not just your baseline, but during implementation, you're also checking against your target. So if you realize that you're not reaching your target, or if you're not going fast enough, then you'll have to modify your activities or understand what is the challenge and rework it. And then at project close, there's going to be, we collect the inline data, You're going to do a final report where you're comparing your baseline to your other measurements in inline, and there'll also be a final evaluation that is externally done. So the requirements from JUs, M&E requirements from JUs now, from application stage, documentation of stakeholder engagement that's disaggregated by the various social groupings, a clear understanding of the problem that's illustrated with baseline data, a clear problem to solution logic that's articulated in your objectives, and indicators that you'll use to measure meaningful change. That is how you'll define success of your project, specifically for climate resilience and social inclusion. And support is available. We're having a sensitization session now, and it's not yet active, but when the call goes out, there will also be a hub, which is a web-based platform that will give you lots of resources, articles, tools, templates, and different things you can access. And then once you are selected for the grant and you're now a grantee, the M&E requirements are quarterly progress reports with complete training registers and other source documentation of your community engagement, your data disaggregated by sex, gender, social vulnerability group, community feedback throughout project life cycle, your baseline, midline, and endline data points, outcome level reporting aligned with our results framework, which is incorporated within the progress report, and your source documents on file, whether photos, timestamp photos, attendance sheets, meeting minutes, etc. Survey responses. And there's support at this stage as well. We're not just setting you off and say, be successful. We're holding your hand as we go along. So in addition to the sensitization session, once you're awarded a grant, there will be a further orientation session, which will carry you more through in terms of the reporting templates. You will have the quarterly site visits with the team, and there will also be an interactive community of practice that you'll have access to as a grantee, where you can ask questions in relatively real time. It's asynchronous, but you'll get responses, and it will be with other practitioners, with the JU's team, and other grantees. And so the key takeaways, there are 5 things to walk away from this with. The first one is monitoring is how you demonstrate and defend the value of your work. So it is absolutely critical. Pick simple and meaningful indicators that reflect real change for the community, not just activities that were completed. You want to collect your baseline data now. You want to disaggregate all the data by sex and social vulnerability from day one. So all your data collection tools have to be able to disaggregate for this. And then once you're doing implementation, you have to make sure that it is done. And then finally, JUs provide tools, templates, and coaching / community. You are not doing this alone. And with that, I close.
Thanks, Zara, and thanks to everyone who has stayed until the end of the presentations. So we will be opening the floor for any additional questions that anyone will have. We did have questions about whether we'll share the presentations and the recordings. Yes, we will do so. So we'll take any questions at this time. Right, I am not seeing any hands currently.
If I may, Joni.
Sure, go ahead,
There were
Carl.
questions in the chat which we've been responding to as we've gone along, but
Mhm.
perhaps not everyone has paid attention to the chat. and seeing the questions and the responses. And there was a question about what is urban, what kinds of communities fit the description. The questioner was saying, if we're in Stony Hill or Gordon Town, would that qualify as urban? So I don't know if we want to just very quickly say out loud the responses, just in case not everyone has seen what's in the chat, or everyone do please scroll through the chat for responses to questions.
Okay, all right. So thanks for that, Carol. So I will read out that question and response. So the question was, how urban is urban, with small urban centers in the hills of St. Andrew fall within the scope, like Rock Hall, Stony Hill, Garden Town, etc. And the response was, urban can be defined in terms of population size and level of service, such as healthcare, commercial activity, etc. So that can guide the thinking. So from starting, an area is considered urban if it has a population of 2,000 or more, and possesses at least 3 urban characteristics, such as paved roads, electricity, water, or commercial centers. The areas you mentioned should fit, but would have a peri-urban classification, urban fringe, or a transitional zone where urban meets the hillside before getting into rural areas. And then we had another question.
Just before Joni, there's a raised hand from
Okay,
Shanique.
okay. I'm not seeing the hand, so please go ahead.
Shanique had her hand up.
All right, thanks. So Shanique.
Yes, sorry. Good morning, everyone. Let me say first, an excellent presentation by your team. It was very clear and I was able to follow throughout the end. I had my hand up, but I believe somebody put the said question in the chat. That was why I removed it. The question was just confirming that government ministries, agencies, public, private, schools, churches, they are eligible to apply for this grant funding. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Joni, you're muted.
Oh, sorry about that. I was just checking if there were any more hands before I go to the next question in the chat. All right, I'm not seeing any. So there was another question. Can this be applicable to a government farm that is experiencing flooding in Clarendon or St. Catherine? And the response, the qualifier would be whether it's in an urban area. And you can go back to Statin's definition and classification, which I had read earlier. So that is what would be the determining factor. And then the other questions that I see were related to sharing of the presentations and the recording, right? So we have a question on where will the call be hosted? So it will be on our social media pages, the_EFJ, that's Instagram. We'll put it in the chat. You can find us on Facebook, the Environmental Foundation of Jamaica. It will also be in the newspapers and on our website. So we'll put all of that information in the chat, as well as an email to send any questions that you may have that you didn't think about today. And all of the details will be in the ad for the call.
And perhaps, Joni, because it was one of the questions, if we just reiterate the call period and what's going to happen in that period.
Okay, sure. So the call will open on the 29th. It will close on the 22nd of May. And in between, like about 2 weeks in, we will be doing some capacity building workshops. This is a new era for us, and the country possibly as a whole. So we are making these sessions mandatory to just help to guide the applications, to ensure that they're robust, that they're hitting all the notes for us, the things that we're looking for. And we will put, what we will do is we're going to ask you to fill out a registration form and that will help us to tailor these sessions to your needs. And once we get that registration in, we will send you the detailed information for the sessions, what to bring, the mode of delivery, and all of that. So that information will be in the ad for the call, and so we're asking you to do fill out the registration form and then participate in the sessions. Are there any other questions?
Shanique's hand is up again.
Okay, Shanique, you can go ahead.
You said mandatory. Does that mean that it would give the applicant points towards their application?
Not points, but in order to submit the application, you wouldn't have needed to have participated in the sessions.
Okay, okay.
Okay, so I'm just putting your email contact in the chat. All right, so I've just asked the team if there's anything that you want to add before we close. Okay, no hands, no comments. So thanks again, everybody, for taking the time to participate in this session. We know that it was a lot, and we will delve a lot deeper in the capacity building workshops, and you will have a lot more opportunities to ask questions. As Zara had said, we will have the information hub. That detail will also be posted when we put out a call so that you can have access to resources to help you to put together your proposals. But please feel free to reach out to us, and we look forward to seeing you at these sessions and to receiving your proposals. So thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of the day.
Thanks.